at the, thank you, Sandra. So my name is John Jordy. I am the Instructional Assessment Coordinator at the University of Florida. I work in our Center for Teaching Excellence, and my primary responsibility is around assessment, data, and course evaluations. And then I'll pass it over to Janet Staker.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Janet Staker-Werner from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'm affiliated with the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Mentoring. I'm a program manager for faculty instructional development and innovation. And I'm also the generative AI lead as we evolve into this area. I'm happy to be here. I'm going to toss it over to Justin.
Hi, thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Justin Palazzola. I am a manager with academic technologies for the system. And I'm also primarily here because I lead our AI team that focuses around training and resources and things like that for the system at the moment. All right, Adam.
Good morning, everyone. Hi, I'm Adam Maxwell. I'm a professor of journalism and media at Indiana University Southeast, which is one of the campuses in the Indiana University system. I also have a role as a senior faculty fellow for Gen AI learning innovation within our IT organization that works with faculty and instructional designers and instructional technologists across all of our campuses to support the integration of Gen AI into teaching and learning practices.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. And if everybody here, if you wouldn't mind putting your name and university, institution, as well as what your role is at your particular institution, we'd love to have that so we can then send out follow-up panel discussions. Feel free to put that information in the chat so that we can continue to reach out to everybody and know where you guys are and what role you guys play. So again, welcome everybody to today's session. So if you wouldn't mind putting your name, institution, and then your role, that would be fantastic. So as I mentioned, good morning, everybody. My name is John Jordy, and I am the co-chair of the Faculty Development Subcommittee. And we started this process over a year ago where the subcommittee identified some topics. One of those was stepping stones in learning analytics that we could dive a little bit deeper into, and knew our institutions and faculty members really needed some additional support. As many of you know and have become fully aware of the impact of AI has been having in our classrooms, our faculty members are really struggling in understanding the policy, if there is one at your particular institution, what the real world implications generative AI is having on us and our students. I know every single day I'm getting an email from one of the different AI tools, whether it's Claude, whether it's Google or OpenAI and ChatGPT. I'm just getting emails all the time about, all right, here's our latest update. Here's what it can do. Here's what's going to be available. And our faculty and our students are really trying to figure out how to navigate that in the educational context. So we set to create a set of guiding principles around the use of AI, and particularly focusing on the impact on teaching and learning. So over the course of the coming months, we will be hosting a panel discussion around each of these principles to dive deeper into their impact and what our colleagues are doing in this space. Again, today's session is really focused on Principle 1. So let's dive a little bit deeper into Principle 1, which is focused on generative AI in education should prioritize educational relevance in the learning context. And we wanted this one to be first. We wanted to make sure that generative AI, the use of it, is relevant into our learning context. And what we meant by that, and what we did here, was provide, again, some additional context, what we're trying to get to with this exact principle. So again, it should be relevant to the curriculum, the course content, materials, and resources and activities. So when a student logs into Canvas or logs into your particular learning management tool, they know that what they're being shown, what assessments, what projects, how generative AI is being used in the classroom is focused in on these particular areas. And then again, how can we as educators and faculty and staff assist our faculty in these areas? How can we talk to our faculty about prioritizing this in its contents? Jessica has already asked, thank you. Is there a final version of these principles? The answer to that is yes. What we are focused on for the first 5, those first 5 are finalized. There are additional ones that we've begun to look at. So there's a 6 and a 7 that the subcommittee can dive a little bit deeper into and create some additional information on. So part of that's going to come out of these panel discussions, actually, is the feedback that we receive from those folks who are attending these sessions. We really want to make sure that as we're hearing feedback and as we're having these panel discussions, when we get that feedback from the staff, from faculty, and from those participants in these panel discussions, that we can then begin to add or maybe even adjust some of these principles and some of the content and some of the resources. Because what our subcommittee is really focused on is how can we help our faculty in this area, right? How can we develop workshops, which is what Stepping Stones is really about. And Christina's, I'm sure, can provide a lot more context into that as well, is, again, what resources can we provide faculty? What kind of workshops can we can come out of this? And really, how can we assist our faculty in this area? So yes, I hope that answers your question. Any others before we get started? Okay. Zandra, please let me know if I miss anything in the chat. All right. So we're going to start with question 1, which is, how do you define educational relevance when it comes to integrating generative AI in the classroom? So this is really for any of the panelists to talk about. And if you have any questions or would like any additional insight, again, please feel free to add your questions or comments in the chat. And we can work with the panelists as those questions come in and make sure provide them with some time. So let's get started with question 1. Justin, Janet?
I'll dive in here. I really thought this question, and rightfully so, placed first. And I think I would add on to this, not only for educational relevance, but also transitioning into the workplace. And I'm going to put a link in here from Cengage. They did an employability report that came out early summer of this year. And one of the things that when they actually interviewed some of the graduating students, they felt they were not prepared from the student side. And it may have been touched on, but it wasn't expanded on. And from the employer side, they shared that they were expecting institutions to provide some baseline knowledge. So it speaks to me as a messy area right now. So to me, it's very relevant. So how do we help support faculty where they're at least in our institution, University of Wisconsin-Madison, we cover the full spectrum. We have some folks that are champions, they're out in front of this, and it goes all the way down to laggards that just have not stepped forward into that space. So we've taken the position of meeting faculty where they're at and trying to coach and mentor rather than saying you need to do this. So it's a slow process. I mean, we're in 2002-04, we're first starting to gain some traction, but in 2002-03, we really were just trying to organize and kind of find out where folks were at, as well as keeping abreast of the evolving landscape. So I would consider this a very important principle going forward. The one other thing I'll add, and then I'll turn it over for others to comment. I've been working with high schools and they're using this, specifically 9 through 12. However, if they're coming into a university setting or institutional setting with the idea that they can use this and we're not aligned with that, to me, there's a possible gap. So with that, I'll turn it over to any of the other panelists that would like to speak to this issue.
Yeah, to build off of what Janet was saying, I mean, I think that when we think about educational relevance, I think, you know, we want to take a breather, take a step, take a beat, and you know, make sure that we're not just saying we're going to introduce AI into sort of every single function of what we do, even though Gen AI may have an impact on many, many functions of what we do. So I think that that's important within when we think about this sort of concept of educational relevance, right? Even on that previous slide, that John showed, we would talk about things like curriculum compatibility, right? I mean, does it make sense within the context of the curriculum? To Janet's point, is it relevant in the context of the discipline and what students are going to be expected to do post graduation? That being said, though, I think that there is a role to play of broad integration of these skills, using these technologies across the curriculum. In many ways, in fact, I see it kind of like, over the last 30, 40 years, we've seen writing across the curriculum, then sort of communication across the curriculum. And I really think that we're at a point when technology or digital literacy, of which sort of AI, Gen AI in particular, is a big part of that, sort of really needs to be embedded across the curriculum in relevant ways, right? In ways that where students see some both professional relevance or authentic relevance and what they might be doing later on in their studies or in the career, how it might benefit them, but also sort of personal relevance. How can these technologies be useful? At the end of the day, these technologies are general purpose, general use technologies, so they have a lot of application in a lot of things. But I think that we do want to sort of be thoughtful in how we're introducing those use cases to students, and ideally, hopefully, that we're doing it in a way that is somewhat coordinated, right? One of the things that we're doing at IU is we're developing a set of Canvas modules that we'll share with faculty that they can pull right into their course. Some of those are sort of foundational. What is Gen AI? Basics of prompt engineering, kind of stuff like that, ethics. But also others are much more sort of task oriented. So for example, there's one that we're working on that's studying and learning with Gen AI that, we'll talk about sort of key use cases that hopefully a student can maybe use within a class. Maybe an instructor will give them that activity, but then they'll take those skills and then apply it into their to their other tasks. And we're doing the same thing with finding and analyzing scholarly information and writing and revising, and we'll add more of those. But I think we have to start with sort of the relevant task, and then hopefully over time sort of build those skills, again, much the way that we think about sort of writing or communication or these things that really exist across the curriculum.
Yeah, I agree, Adam. I think the first thing that comes to my mind when I see something like this is I've been able to listen to Jose Bowen give speeches at a couple of different conferences, and the number one thing he says is that in the future you're not going to lose your job to AI. You're going to lose your job to somebody who uses AI efficiently, right? And that's where I think there's a large opportunity to hit or miss if you don't have that relevant AI experience incorporated into the right classes. And as Janet mentioned as well, there are a lot of different work fields now that don't necessarily require AI, but AI can be used very efficiently in order to do a better job. And if we're not incorporating that into the classroom and teaching our students how to use that effectively and efficiently, then they are losing out compared to going to a possible different university that would teach them that. And we're putting them at a disadvantage when they get into the workforce. And so making it relevant in those ways is extremely critical.
Yeah, you mentioned Bowen, who with Eddie Watson from AAC, and you wrote the Teaching with AI book, and I saw Watson give a talk, and he was giving a really interesting example where there was a student who was what we might used to call non-traditional, maybe post-traditional student, right? The type of student that is increasingly likely to be a larger part of our student base, a student who was working full time. And in the business class that they were taking, they were explicitly told, do not use this technology to do this task. And then in the business context that she was in. She was in the real world, right, at that same moment, being told by her leadership, use AI for these tasks. So there's that sort of a disconnect between what are going to be those expectations and sort of how we're preparing to those. It's an understandable disconnect. I think back to what Janet said earlier, right? This is sort of a long arc, right? We're better in 2024 than we were in 2023, and the conversations could continue. But I think we want to be mindful of those changing norms.
Thank you, everyone. So let's go to question 2. So can you provide examples of how generative AI has been used effectively to enhance educational relevance? And I think we kind of talked about this a little bit when it comes to specifically discipline-specific items as well. So Janet?
Sure. Thank you. The real emphasis that I've seen on using generative AI is in writing. Our Writing Across the Curriculum Center has been doing numerous sessions with individual colleges and units across campus. And so it's a really nice way to introduce students into the use of AI. And one thing that we found is that wrongly, we assume that everybody's using it, and that hasn't necessarily been the case. We are now an enterprise shop using Microsoft Copilot. That's what is supported. However, we find that many of our students are using Copilot and even paying the subscription of $20 a month. So that's kind of been a nuance that we really hadn't thought too much about, but we realized that not everybody's going to be on the same platform. And where we've seen it used effectively is to help brainstorming, start idea generation, with the idea that depending on the instructor, how they share the expectations for use in the course. And I'm just going to step back a minute. I think one thing is we've been successful is sharing with instructors, faculty, please have a syllabus statement. If you are going to use it, please share the expectations. Do you need to share your prompts? Do you not? Or if you don't use it in the classroom, please explain why. So I think we've tried to do at our university is give individual instructors agency. Our policies are not that in-depth other than the research arm, but for the general classroom, we have what we call guiding principles, where we share with the instructors, you determine how you want to use it. If you do use it, please be sure to be succinct and concise as far as how it can be used, when it can be used, and also have a conversation with those students. We found like this fall, those instructors, faculty that had an ongoing conversation with their students, there was much more of a comfort level. And this is anecdotal, but it's just what we've been told is by just placing it in a syllabus statement and maybe not even talking about it, students were maybe not all on the same page. So it's important to have those conversations and also to be strategic about how you use it. And I think Justin and Adam talked about this, how do you use this across the campus? Well, with being mindful and also being strategic. We have instructors come to us and say, do I need to use it for everything? Well, is there a reason that you need to use it? And so, how does that align with the learning objectives? And if you do use it, what's the value proposition to the students? So there's a lot of moving parts with this, but I do think it can be most effective when it's an ongoing conversation. And I'll just add one more thing and I'll ask others to share. We had an instructor that wanted to use this. He's likes to try different things. And he shared with his students, he goes, I'm learning along with you. I'm a subject matter expert in the course, but I'm not in generative AI. So what he did is he had a group agreement where they worked on an assignment together. And it was an iterative process. And he felt it took down the anxiety level for all the students because they felt like they were partnering with the instructor. So that was one, and the students loved it. And he's now in his 4th iteration. I mean, he started this right away when chat was introduced. And he said he's learned something from every class. So I think that is one thing to consider is how you use it and to what is the benefit for the students, for the instructor, and then how to make that baseline knowledge come to the fore. Because I don't know about all of you, but we're still finding it's very uneven. We're in the midst of thinking about an AI literacy course. We're not there yet. But we find that it's not consistent what the understanding of both students and faculty are of what generative AI is, and then even compared with machine learning. So Adam or Justin, do you want to chime in here?
Yeah, I think the kinds of examples that we're seeing, many of them very similar to kind of, I think what you articulated, a lot around writing, of course. The most interesting ones, and when I think about again this notion of educational relevance, one of the considerations in those guiding principles is the notion of supplement and not substitute, right? So how can generative AI supplement, and really enhance what we're doing? There's also an element in there of sort of collaborative learning, and when I think about those principles, I think about those of you, if you've not read Ethan Mollick's Co-Intelligence book, highly recommend it. But that concept of co-intelligence, right? An agent, a digital collaborator sitting right next to you, and I think those are the use cases that we're starting to see more of. I think that's perhaps a little bit more of an advanced use case, but we're starting to see sort of some more of that. We have a writing instructor who actually has this deeply integrated, this is a business writing class, deeply integrated generative AI into her course, where the students have to hire a digital assistant, right? And they go through this whole process of, what are the qualities of a digital assistant that you want, and what are they going to be doing, and this really sort of thoughtful, deep, critical thinking process that they ultimately use to develop an agent that then helps them with the work that they're doing over the course of the semester. Other use cases that we're starting to see a little bit more of is specific sort of specific agents. So we have an instructional designer who's worked with a couple of our faculty to create essentially a prompt that we give students, that they give students to then engage in sort of a back and forth in a particular scenario. Right now, we really don't have the technology to be able to create easily sort of a very sort of specific agent where the faculty can create that sort of system prompt and the student acts with it. So, but they've kind of done that to say, here's the prompt you can use. So one of them is like, you're engaging in the practice of interviewing a candidate for a job. So there's this very long, detailed prompt, really sort of emphasizes the task and the context and all these things, and also includes, uploading sample resumes, fake resumes that relate to this scenario. And then the student is engaged in this back and forth with this AI agent. I've seen examples. I'm reading Sal Khan's Brave New Words book, which is quite good. He talks about the role of AI as imagine talking to a historical figure, right? And there are some things in Khan Miko that allow you to do some of those kinds of things. So I think those are the kinds of more advanced use cases that we're starting to see, and I really think that's the opportunity where we can really enhance, our supplement education, right? Because a AI tutor, can be available 24/7. An AI tutor a student might feel more comfortable talking to an AI tutor and being vulnerable to the AI tutor. And those Gen AI tutors can be structured in such a way that it's engaging in that practice of what a good tutor is, right? Engaging in Socratic questioning and being using supportive language and things like that. And it can be available, at 3 in the morning when most faculty probably aren't, right? So, I think that those are some more use cases that we're starting to see that are really examples of enhanced educational relevance. I think we're just starting to sort of, scratch the surface into some of those.
Yeah, no, I agree. Just to kind of add on, I think we've heard quite a few examples, and one of the most exciting things I think is twofold. One is the problem solving, right? So AI can effectively enhance just about anything that you're trying to do from a classroom perspective, whether it's, like Janet mentioned, helping with writing, especially helping with coming up with ideas about how to write, or different things to help improve, and then you do the work yourself, of course, and everything in between. But I like the ability to not only encourage students to find creative ways to go about that and to help themselves, not just simply this is what you have to do. But I also like the use cases where I see the faculty members not only grading the work, but also looking at the prompts, looking at the conversation that is being had with AI and judging that and helping improve that as well, right? Because at the end of the day, like Adam mentioned in the last question, when you're in the workforce, that's going to be where it really pays off, is that ability to prompt write, to problem solve, to come up with a creative solution. The boss has simply given me a task. I need to figure out how to do it the best way possible, probably using AI in some way. How do I do that? And if we don't evaluate and use those kind of cases to enhance them early on, then again, they're at a disadvantage. And, the second point, speaking again to Adam's use bots and things like that, that's probably one of the most exciting things that I'm really ready to have available once we are in the situation where we have either an enterprise solution or a walled garden where we can confidently use non-public FERPA data in the chatbots and in the GPTs without having to worry about them, getting out of the system. It opens up the doors for even more use cases like study bots, grading bots for faculty members, just the ability or idea that a student could have a study or partner bot for all 4 years or whatever of their education that has all of that knowledge and information that they've pumped into it to help them study for each class. Or maybe they have specific ones that they could then take with them to the work field that has all of that knowledge that they learned and can access it, is a huge, huge win. And I think that makes it extremely relevant from that point of view.
Yeah, I agree. I think especially in today's workforce, I mean, that's really the need. And as you pointed out, Justin, too, is as the institutions and as these licenses begin to grow and these become more available to us, whether faculty, staff, or students, is in that kind of walled garden to make sure, like, this is a time-saving tool for me, right? And in my context with data, like we work with large amounts of data. So I know it can resolve a lot of those issues pretty quickly, but because we're using that kind of protected data, it's not something we can just release into these tools itself. So I think that's going to be really, really relevant about, again, it's not that it's replacing me, it's saving me time and providing, academic leadership, it's providing faculty, it's providing the students with some additional support and best practices. So awesome. So the third question is, how do we balance the use of AI as a supplementary tool while encouraging original student work and critical thinking? I think, Janet, you mentioned this a little bit when it comes to the writing program. I wonder if you had some additional insights as well.
Sure. Thanks, John. Yeah, I think it comes back to, having that conversation with the students and not assuming that they know a lot about generative AI. I think the idea of we're going to use it in the classroom, tying that into transitioning into the workplace. It's a 21st century workplace skill. And then having the students explore together. I think where we've seen some success is collaborative working on AI assignments. And one of the things in a class that I observed, it was like they were to critically analyze some of the information that was not correct. And so, they used a database and aligned it with output from the generative AI bot, and they had this discussion regarding what was correct and what was suspicious. So I think an important element of this is that it has to be viewed with a critical eye, that we just can't cut and paste everything, the output, and apply it to something. So I think it supplements that critical thinking process, and it's a technology tool that can, as Justin and Adam have discussed, it doesn't replace, it augments. It can be helpful, but in the end, it's on you, the creator, or the generator of information, to double check. We've done a lot of work with our libraries, and they've been coming and giving workshops. And the idea in the end, it falls on you as the creator of information to verify and confirm that if you use AI, that it's valid. So I think a lot of that is, again, goes back to that conversation and a continued conversation, not just, at the beginning of the semester, because we see that the landscape is changing so rapidly. So we want students to have creativity and think about these things. But if there's some way that AI can be helpful, use it. And if you, as the instructor, as we give you agency, if you want them to provide evidence of the prompt chains or whatever, so be it. But to me, we're just still early on. There's so much that we don't know about how it can be used within a classroom. When Adam and Justin were talking, I thought about image generation. We just in our under our letters in science, we have a graphic arts. We're just starting to kind of probe in that area. And there's just the first focus, at least of our institution, was writing. But now we're starting to reach out to all these different areas and finding out where it can apply. So I think a lot of this, I would suggest that the instructor needs to explore, whether that's in a group of, collaborative faculty talking about this, or partnering with students. And the idea that it's not going to go away. I remember when early 2002-3, after it had been introduced around Thanksgiving in 2002-2, well, is this a fad or a trend? And I think now we know it's here to stay. So some institutions, and I would include ourselves in that, we really stayed quiet that first part of 2002-3, and till we came up with a sort of a roadmap of, instead of putting in place guidelines, giving instructors agency to explore and to observe and also validate what was coming to the surface. So this idea of original student work, we've had lots of conversations about plagiarism and cheating and that type of thing. But again, it comes back to that conversation early on in the semester. What is part of the expectations of the class? So with that, I'll ask Justin or Adam to chime in here.
Yeah, I think, Janet, I think a word that I'll sort of build on is this notion of conversation, and an open conversation, and not just between us and students, but really, what are our professional norms? We don't know. It's commonplace for us as humans to try to take sort of a new thing and then apply sort of an existing paradigm to that new thing. So, for example, we had a conversation in a university-wide Gen AI task force last year that I was on, and one of our charges was, how do we acknowledge or cite the use of generative AI? And the knee-jerk reaction is, well, we should be upfront and say when it's used. And my pushback was basically, what is use, right? I mean, because if a Gen AI tool is used in the writing or creation of an artifact, what's the sort of line at which it transforms from one thing into another? If it's just, did I use this? Then we would literally be at an endpoint where every single piece of content everywhere would say, this has been produced using generative AI. And at that point, that statement is really meaningless, right? So when we think about citing, often we're thinking about it, well, we cite sources of information. We don't usually cite collaborators. We acknowledge collaborators, usually, by something like authorship. Do we start to sort of acknowledge the Gen AI collaborator? With writing, I've sort of given the example of, there's lots of times where I've collaborated on research, where I've done a lot of the work in data analysis, and maybe that's my contribution to the project, but I've done less writing. Does that mean that contribution is not mine, right? So I think that these are things that I don't have a clear answer for. I don't think anybody does, but we have to have these open conversations within our disciplines, and certainly within our classes, to say these are norms. Norms don't develop because someone created a policy and then now everyone follows it, right? Norms develop over time through trial and error. And I think that we have to be open about those conversations, be mindful in saying, I don't know, and we're going to figure this out together, and we're going to, we're not going to figure out the answer. I mean, it is, this may be somewhat paradigm type of a shift. And I think that's what's challenging in this space, because when you think about original work, for example, are things like citation or acknowledgement, we're using traditional sort of paradigms to and words that exist and that work really well in that traditional paradigm. It may not necessarily work as well in this new evolving one. So I think that notion of open conversations in our disciplines with our students, acknowledging sort of the idea of vulnerability there is so very, very important. But it also creates a lot, a need for comfort levels with uncertainty. And I think that's where some of the conflict comes into play and the challenges come into play.
Yeah, I agree, Adam. I think, one of the most important things that we've seen here, at least in our system, is we've had a couple of our schools that have put a really big push into guidelines around setting up syllabi and the expectations. And I know somebody mentioned that earlier, but it's really nice because students going in can know what to expect on certain assignments and just the class in general, right? Which immediately sets them up to know kind of what they're looking at. But then also from a training perspective, we've had a lot of really good luck focusing around implementation, not just how to use ChatGPT. Okay, you type in this little box and whatever, but how do you implement it in your classroom? What are some ideas? And we try to make it as easy as possible for faculty members in our system, that they can go into their class. They can have, whether it's simple little games or activities to get them comfortable with AI, or it's serious stuff based on the stuff within the class. Encouraging that use and encouraging the training around implementation and making it as easy as possible helps to encourage the students as well on what types of stuff they're able to use AI on, and builds up just the trust value, I think, at least from what I've seen from our faculty members and the feedback that they've given, which is extremely important.
Thank you, guys. I know we have about 14 more minutes or so we'll be quick with this next question, and then leave some time for Q&A and information around the next session. So the last question is, what are some effective ways to integrate generative AI into collaborative learning environments? This is particular an area that our faculty members have noted that we struggle with, especially when it comes to these kind of group projects. Adam, you kind of touched on this as well. Like, how do we acknowledge, parts that the AI tool, played in, this group project or in this assessment or in this assignment. So Janet, I'll first leave it with you, and then we'll have everybody else chime in.
Sure. Thank you, John. Yeah, I think the one of the most important things you can do is make time for it. Schedule it in for a class session or another way to get students involved. Because again, I come back to the lived experience I've been a part of. Not everybody's on it. So, and they may feel a bit, just anxious they don't want to share that they haven't been on it. So when you have a collaborative environment like this in a classroom, with a low stakes assignment, it can be really kind of break the ice and, oh yeah, I didn't think of that. That's where I've seen it to be very successful. And the idea is, though, you have to set it up and you have to make time. It's not a kind of an afterthought. So it needs to be specific or time bound on how you want to implement that in the class. I've also seen in the vet med area where they've used collaborative for students that maybe, this was in a large mammal class, they created flashcards for study aids. So the students actually did this. The faculty sort of set up the guidelines, and it was an exchange of ideas on how to prepare for a certain exam. So it got everybody involved, and it was, I like to call it fingers on the keyboard, because sometimes we talk about these things, but we don't actually do them. And at least what I've observed is when we can actually get fingers on the keyboard, and this is not just students, but faculty as well, it's a world of difference. We offer something called the Course Design Institute every spring. And last year, we actually had, they were encouraged to bring their laptops, but we had stations set up. And we had probably 4 or 5 people that had never placed their fingers on the keyboard, weren't even connected to Copilot or chat. So getting them in that space, and then that conversation that happened between those 4 people was really something. So it just, again, sort of took that anxiety level down. And I think one of the things that we've learned is some of the workshops or sessions that we offer, they're like one. We have this year sponsored 18 events. We've kept it in front of them often. And we think that's really important, that it's a iterative learning process, because they need to get up to speed on it, as well as the landscaping the landscape is continuing to evolve. So this idea that we try and offer 2 events every month. So that is a way for faculty to try things out and then take it back and put it into their classrooms.
Awesome. So I'm going to move forward with the session. So for everybody here, I'm going to put a link in the chat to that Google Doc again that you can make your own copy and see. But we have our next session, which is for Principle 2, which is December 4th, 2024, Wednesday from 1 to 2 Eastern PM. And we'll have additional dates for the other, for 3 to 5 announced later this year. That'll be sometime in spring 2025. So just kind of mark your calendars and just make sure that you kind of stay aware of that. We'll, of course, be sending out the invites that'll have the registration, just like we did before, from our various community members. So just be on the lookout for that for December 4th from 1 to 2. So we wanted to leave a few minutes for Q&A for everybody. So if you guys want to unmute yourself, want to raise your hand, ask your questions in the chat. I know we have some that we received initially. So if nobody has any particular questions, there are a few that I know that were sent to us prior to the session, but feel free to unmute yourself or raise your hand. If not, I'm going to put one of the questions in the chat that we received, and I can leave it to Adam or Justin if you want to answer this particular question that we got.
Yeah, when I saw this one in the email, I was thinking about a specific thing. So I'm glad you that's what you started with. So how can instructional designers engage faculty to use best practices for course design? So I wanted to sort of tell you about an activity that we actually engaged. You know, how do instructional designers talk with faculty, or instructional technologists talk with faculty about generative AI? So actually, I cloned my own voice, and then I connected to that through a tool that I can tell you more about later on if you want, that basically allowed them to talk to virtual me, and it was my voice that sort of talked back to them, and I gave it sort of this prompt that said, you know, you're skeptical about AI use, and, you know, so how do you sort of guide them through this conversation? I think that, and I'm happy to sort of share that system prompt that I used. I think the instructional designers found it kind of effective to engage in that conversation. But I think a lot of the things that, you know, really we used to sort of to seed that prompt, that scenario, were things that were embedded in the slide earlier that John shared. You know, that framework of that, you know, thinking about it, how can it be relevant, and how can it enhance the experience that you're building for the students and not replace? I think that, you know, in 2022, we were kind of at this point of like, everyone's cheating. And that was like 2022, 2023, and then a little bit into the early 2023. And then last academic year, later on into it, like maybe in this past spring, it was like, this thing's not going away. Let me think about the use, how it could be useful in my own work. I think that's where we are now still. You know, so I think that the way to start introducing the technology is for you to start to talk to faculty about how can they use it effectively. So one of the things I do, you know, in my own teaching, is I use it as like a feedback assistant. I don't have it grade my students' work for many reasons, but what I do is I have a prompt that I've set up to say, you're my grading assistant. You're sitting next to me, and you're going to help me draft feedback to the students. You have all of the context of the assignment, all of the context of you know, the readings that relate to that assignment, the rubric, and I'm going to type out generalized observations that the AI is going to take and put into 2 or 3 or 4 sentences in my conversational style, making references to the course material, making references to the rubric, that really relate to my observations. So now I have a situation where I have personalized feedback for every single student, rather than, you know, relying on a comment bank that maybe kind of get at the idea. So like, that's something where I'm able to provide personalized feedback, and it's actually faster for me to grade, right? So so that's one way that I've sort of started to introduce it. How can faculty use it in their own work? And I think that's the first step to then start to think about, you know, how do we begin to integrate it into the course design, whether that's by doing things like scenarios, are, you know, are creating tutor bots or different things like that.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions before we close? Questions, comments, thoughts? Thank you, Xander, for putting the link. So if you want to register for Principal 2, Xander has put that link directly in the chat for our December 4 session. So thank you. So any other questions, comments, thoughts before we close? Well, I did really want to thank you, Janet, Adam, and Justin, for being part of and serving as panelists for today's session. And if you are willing to serve as potential panelists for future sessions,